discussion covered regulatory advances in highly automated driving. Today, we will continue by focusing on the cybersecurity framework to enable connected cars and automated driving. Before we start today's session, let me remind you that all presentations will be made available on the website of the symposium after the event. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the event webpage as well. Two chat boxes are available, one of which is dedicated to the Q&A only. Participants can submit their questions at any time by typing the question in the Q&A box. Please do not use the chat box for asking the questions, but use it to provide comments and statements or any other administrative issue. At this point, let me invite Mr. Michael Sena, who will moderate our session today. Michael has had his own consulting practice since 1984, working in the areas of navigable database development and connected vehicle services and systems, with clients in all over the major vehicle markets. Since 2013, he has written and published The Dispatcher, a monthly newsletter on new developments in the vehicle industry. For the past 4 years, he has been the moderator of this symposium session on cybersecurity and over-the-air software updates. I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Michael Sena to moderate this session at this year's symposium. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Stefano. Hello to all. I'd like to welcome you to the symposium's second session. Vehicle Cybersecurity Framework is ready. It's time for deployment. Going to share my screen with you right now. The more we've become a connected society, the more the lack of secure networks and computer systems affects every part of our lives, from the votes we cast in elections to the movements of money in our bank accounts. Protecting vehicles from cyber attacks is as important as protecting our credit cards. More important if one considers the loss of lives that can occur if vehicles are weaponized. Imagine a nightmare scenario in which a group of suicidal terrorists drive a dozen heavy vans into a community, spread themselves around, and at a signal, begin to drive at high speed through the streets, killing as many people as they can until they are subdued. Now imagine that a group of terrorists can accomplish the same objective without leaving the comfort of their den of destruction, thousands of miles away, by hacking into a fleet of driverless vehicles. Cyber terrorism, with the commandeering of vehicles, has not yet occurred. At least to my knowledge, it hasn't occurred. But the danger grows as more companies turn over driving functions to highly automated onboard systems and provide over-the-air software and firmware updating. In our session today, we will discuss two new WP29 approved regulations, one for vehicle cybersecurity, Regulation 155, and another for vehicle software updates, Regulation 156. These regulations provide a framework for the automotive sector to put in place the necessary processes to design and deliver cyber-secure connected vehicles with software and firmware that can be updated remotely. The questions this session will address are, what do these regulations mean in concrete terms for vehicle manufacturers and their suppliers? Are the regulations enough to ensure that vehicles are fully protected as highly automated driving products are added with ever-increasing operational design domains? And what steps need to be taken to adopt these regulations in all regions? We've assembled an expert panel to provide insights on these issues and give their views on what needs to be done to implement the regulations. I will give a brief introduction to each one of our speakers, as they are presenting. Our schedule today, we will begin with an introduction and a keynote by Guido Glutschke. We will then have 4 presentations, and these presentations will address the regulations, UN 155, UN Regulation 155, and Regulation 156. We will then have an industry views on each one of these regulations. We'll then have a 10-minute break, and during that break, you'll have an opportunity to get some coffee or do whatever else you need to do. And when we come back, we'll have approximately 90 minutes, during which we will have a discussion with the panelists, addressing and talking about, in our panel discussion, each one of the issues that we've addressed. I will also be reviewing the question and answers that those of you who have questions to the panel, and we'll take questions from the Q&A for the panelists. As Stefano has said, all presentations will be available on the symposium site. The entire session is being recorded and will also be placed on the symposium site and will be available to all participants. So, without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to turn over the screen to our keynote speaker, Guido Glutschke. Guido is the Managing Director of the Institute for Security and Safety, ISS, at the Brandenburg University of Applied Sciences, where he teaches in the field of cyber and nuclear security. He contributes with his expertise at the WP29, is a member of the Energy Cyber Expert Cybersecurity Platform of the European Commission, and an expert in cybersecurity in the nuclear context. So I will stop sharing. Okay.
I think it's okay, Mike.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Guido,
you can start.
Screen, I think.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Michael. Okay, so everybody should see my screen now. Good afternoon, everybody. Before I would start, I want to introduce our institute, the Institute for Security and Safety at the Brandenburg University of Applied Sciences. So Institute was founded in 2012, asked by the International Atomic Energy Agency to support them after the Stuxnet incidents happened at the Iran nuclear plants. And we supported this nuclear field, this nuclear sector for a couple of years. Later then, we supported the energy grids and the cybersecurity regulations for energy. And as you can imagine, there is no room for flaws, neither in nuclear sector nor in the cyber grids, in the energy grids. So our area of expertise is cybersecurity and energy, and also in automotive. So we started to support UNEC in 2019, but we are more or less looking from outside to the sector and to the cybersecurity regulation. And I try to give you today an overview of our thoughts from that perspective. We also are involved in a couple of international activities. I don't want to go through all of them, but want to mention the first one. So we are working with UNECE and also with ITU. So we are in Center of Excellence of ITU Academy, but we are also working with OEWG, that's the Open-Ended Working Group on cyber norms on international level. which is directly run under the General Assembly of the United Nations. And that is important. I will come back to that later. First of all, every time when I have to do with a cybersecurity framework or cybersecurity regulation, and session 2 says this, vehicle cybersecurity framework is ready, it's time for deployment, I have always the same questions, because we can be protected by 99%, but if there's a 1% vulnerability, then we might have a problem. So the questions which came up into my mind are we ready to deploy on the one hand, and is the framework sufficient on the second hand? Let's go and look at the first question. First of all, I think everybody has the same understanding when talking about cybersecurity and the new UN R155 regulation. We're looking to the upper right area saying secure software development, secure hardware development for cars, secure diagnostic systems, this kind of things. So this red box is pretty much focusing on cybersecurity in cars. But the UN regulation also says that it's applicable to development, production, and post-production, which means, literally spoken, that also the green part should be focused on. So, which means cybersecurity in production, because the car is produced by the manufacturer. But that extends now the view from only looking to the car and probably car communication to the production environment. So we have to secure the production environment, or is it a question? And if we look to engineering, for example, and engineering workstations and the development process of cars, we also have to look to the blue box or blue boxes, because now it comes to business IT. Backend systems are also business IT when operating cars. And so we have all these different security domains, which by today are not integrated in companies. So my understanding and my experience from talks with this or work in the sector is that these are distinguished organizational units, and they are not working together. Probably business IT has implemented an information security management system according to ISO 27001, which is often seen in such kind of companies. On the other hand, we have now the UN R155 for the red box. But what do we have for the green box, for example? Yeah, and the UNICE regulation does not say anything about cybersecurity threats against production systems. So I think we have different scopes, we have overlapping scopes, we have probably overlapping responsibilities in the companies working on these topics. And the question arises, which kind of integrated processes you need, for example? Is there one standard which can cover all? Are there different standards which have to be integrated into each other? That are questions which will come up. And now, okay, we have this UNECE regulation, which will be a delegated act on EU level, and then for European scope comes to the OEMs. And as said, the OEMs have probably an ISMS run by today, and now they have to implement in CSMS, the Cybersecurity Management System, which is fine, which makes sense. So we have from the German Automotive Association, there's a red book explaining a little bit how to implement the CSMS. So OEMs have their part. They're pre-audits and they're fully supported more or less. But what's about the suppliers? The suppliers, they are not really aware of this new UN regulation. And it has to do with the fact that this regulation comes from UN level, far away from where suppliers are working today. And the discussions I have now nearly every week with suppliers are, so how are coming this new cybersecurity regulations down to the different supply levels? Is it by using contracts? Is it by using requirements? Is it by using tools like we have in Germany, this TISAX methodology, which now covers information security, prototype protection, and data protection? So should we add something there, which is more or less manufacturer auditing? So that are questions which we are now discussing also with our institute. Within this week, we have an expert round on the table discussing between OEM and between supplier what is needed to have it. And even if we have that, the next question is, Now we have the regulation, and probably the regulation is understood and it's clear how it comes to the supplier. Do we have the competences? And that is, of course, the next question. So UNR 155 says competent personnel with appropriate cybersecurity skills and specific automotive risk assessment knowledge is needed. But if you go to Annex 5, look deeper into the measures and think about what measures are there and how they're probably implemented, it's really first, it's clear that we need people with high sophisticated cybersecurity knowledge. So that is, for me personally, that is one of the biggest challenges we have, because there is this timeline. We have mid of 2024 as a deadline, so to say, and we need people who engineered and produced electronic architectures based on these measures, based on risk analysis, threat analysis, on this kind of measures. So I think that's a really big challenge. And so from our point of view, competence analysis and development of appropriate methodologies are the answer to that. Now looking to the second part of my questions. Is this framework sufficient? And with sufficient, I mean, does it cover everything which it should cover, or is there, are there boundaries? How far is the scope going? So in the middle, we see development, production, post-production. That are the main processes, that are the words which are in the UN regulation. But what's about the supply chain? So the steps before, looking to hardware and software. We know that there are big challenges in securing hardware and software. I'm not sure if you know that even on the hardware side, there are so many hardware Trojans in between that there is no categorization of this type of Trojans and attacks. So we have a big challenge on the hardware and software side, how to produce secure hardware and secure software. Then, of course, as discussed, coming to company from the development processes through production to post-production, which more or less means operating. And operating also means the car is driving. The car is driving in cities. If you think about smart cities and smart projects, the car has to be an integrated part of a smart city concept. Yeah? And also the charging infrastructure are interesting, because charging infrastructure that are more or less parts of the energy network. And I talked to you about so I'm personally working on European level much with the energy sector and in DG Energy. And what we are looking from that point of view is that the networks has to be developed in the same way as needed for such kind of automotive development. Yeah, so at the World Economic Forum in our working group there, we calculated how many cars has to be hacked to bring the whole energy network in Europe down, or at least make it unstable. So that are questions which are coming up and which has to be looked at if we are thinking about a reliable and secure infrastructure in Europe or all over the world. So cybersecurity will be, and I'm really convinced about that, cybersecurity will be a selection criteria in the future on the question, do I buy such a car, do I operate or run such a car? And cybersecurity is a basic for that. And we have seen in the last couple of months, so from December, January, February, March, we have seen two major incidents. On the one hand, SolarWinds, which was an attack against the US mostly, and the other one was Hafnium, which was an attack against exchange infrastructure. And both of that seems to be nation states or nation-sponsored attacks against infrastructures, against systems, against companies. So we have to, if we talk about cybersecurity in a holistic view, it's not good enough to look to one regulation or a couple of regulations focusing on a car or probably supply chain. We also have to look what is the international view on that. And that has to do with the fact, or with the question on, if we have massive cyber attacks against cars, against energy infrastructures, smart city infrastructures, who's defending? Who's defending in that cases? It's interesting to hear that the reinsurance sector now this year starts to think about exclusion for cyberwar. So there will be, and that's their game, their aim. They want to have a Cyberwar exclusion by 2022, which means we are all in the situation that we have more or less a situation to self-defense our cyber infrastructures and our cyber elements we have, cyber systems. So that part, working on this on the international level on cyber norms and protection, is a part of the puzzle. We cannot start as a manufacturer's level and saying, okay, the manufacturer produce a secure product by using secure parts and then having a good secure supply chain. It's also a big part looking above this, beyond this, and think about what's in states level, what's going on there, how to protect this, what is in the automotive ecosystem in this point of view. Yeah? And with this, I will come to the end and we'll give you some ideas on which actions are needed for cybersecurity readiness and sufficiency. So more or less to give somehow answers to my first questions. We did a couple of things in the past or initiated a couple of things. For example, a research project in Germany on a generic digitalized vehicle EE architecture as a digital twin on an automotive cyber range. So that will be hopefully a research project starting next year. So we need that for testing, for development, for forensics, for training, for all these purposes. Because we cannot hack cars and find out how it's going. So we need this kind of element. We need also, and I addressed this in my talk, capacity building in automotive and probably a generic curriculum design, which fits to UN R155. And also guidance is needed. We did such a document for the German automotive sector, especially for the suppliers, because they are waiting for good information on how they should implement supply chain and what this cybersecurity management system means for them. And also I would add to that the multi-stakeholder dialogue on cyber in the vehicle ecosystem and international initiatives on security and sustainability in cyber, which are also part of a successful development on future network cards. So that was it from my side. Thank you very much. And I will give back to Marco.
Thank you very much, Guido. You have definitely outlined some of the major concerns and major issues that we're going to have to address. Just listening to you, and I have had the opportunity to review your presentation before and your thoughts. It does sound to me like the answer to the questions that you've posed, that we're not really ready for deployment. Is that your conclusion, or is that an intermediate conclusion? What is it?
So it was not my intention to answer both questions, because I think we have the panel with a lot of really renowned experts in this field. So I'm not sure if I'm in the position to say this will fail in any case. No, it will not. I only want to address that we have to look for, or have to look at a holistic approach, that we have to have things in mind, especially if you start in that phase where you have a new regulation. You are only focusing on what the regulation is saying. Yes. And probably not looking to, okay, there are other areas which have to be developed in the same time. Or if you take 2024, how far, or is there a cybersecurity regulation on the energy side, which is directly connected to the car? The car is part of an energy network. So is that going in the same direction? Is it going in the same speed? Is it synchronized at some points? How these ecosystems talk to each other? And that is what I want to make aware, that these questions are really important. Because car does mean we need on the one hand energy, and we need on the other hand communication. And that things have to be there if you want to be successful.
The other thing you mentioned, and this is a very important aspect those of us who are working in the automobile industry understand that the job of the automotive OEMs right now is as much coordinating as it is assembly. There's manufacturing is being done, and it's being distributed all over the world and different types of delivery chains. But you said that you don't feel that the suppliers are yet part of the picture, that you've met suppliers who don't seem to understand that this is going to happen, this must happen, it's going to be from those in those countries where type approval is required, that this will be a requirement for having a vehicle, putting a vehicle on the road. What needs to be done to get the suppliers into this picture?
I would say we need two things. On the one hand, we need the competences on the supplier side that they are able to understand what to do. On the other hand, we need a mechanism or instruments on how are coming the cybersecurity requirements into the processes of the supplier. Until today, if I talk to them, they're saying, okay, sometimes there are coming functional requirements or safety requirements from the OEM, and they are not sure if cybersecurity is inside, or if that are cybersecurity requirements according to the UN regulation. So there's no clear understanding on how that goes. That's exactly why we have to discuss which way that should go, which instruments are there. That it must be clear to the supplier what he has to do. They are only producing what the customer will need.
Do you think the OEMs need to be doing more to ensure that the suppliers know what they're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, they have to do more, and we have the problem that, or the suppliers I talk to, they fear that every OEM interprets the UN regulation in a different way, and the requirements also in a different way. So that a supplier says, okay, I'm getting requirements from OEM 1 and from the same more or less requirements from OEM 2, but one is focusing on measures, the next one is focusing on security processes, and so I'm not able to implement what is needed or what my customers are wanted to me, because it's too expensive to implement that.
Your institute is I know it's not just focused on Germany, because of people can come from everywhere, but you seem to have a very close contact with the OEMs who are in Germany. Are there other institutions like yours that are doing similar work that you're cooperating with? Because this has to cover all 27 countries within the EU, at least from the type approval Europe side, and then there's a type approval in Japan and South Korea and so on. But are there other institutions that you're cooperating with that can sort of make sure that we're covering all of the OEMs, not just the German OEMs?
Yeah, so we started in November with our first roundtable discussion, because we saw that the suppliers are not aware of this UN regulation, especially smaller ones. And now this week on Thursday, we have our second roundtable where we invited them, and that's more or less open for every OEM, but it's in German. So, but every OEM is welcome, as a supplier is welcome, and we want to discuss this. And there are other universities which are more on the automotive and technical side. Yeah, so the research project we initiated was together with Karlsruhe University of Applied Science, and together with KIT, and Bosch is in there, and Infineon is in there. So we are thinking about that, but I don't know exactly if there is a European or international activities going on there. So because for us, it's our first major step going into automotive, while seeing that this need is there in Germany. So I'm not really aware of how it looks from a French perspective or for a Japanese perspective. But we are open to cooperate internationally with all institutes. Yeah.
Okay. Guido, I know you have to leave us at this point, but your associate, Svante Westphal, will be participating in the panel. I've got more questions to ask that are specifically related to ISS. I want to thank you. At this point, there would be great applause for your keynote presentation. I really appreciate your taking the time and participating in the symposium, and we'll look forward to in a year's time all the work that's been done by your institute and reporting on that. Thank you again very much.
Yeah.
Guido.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to everybody at IGU and UNSC.
Okay, we're going to move to 4 presentations. The first 2 presentations will be specifically related to the regulations. The first one will be by Darren Hanley. Darren has been with the UK Department for Transport for over 10 years, where he's head of infrastructure grants and runs a team in the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, which provides grants for homes and workplaces to get electric vehicle charge points. In 2016, he took on the responsibility to push forward the DFT's agenda on cybersecurity in the field of connected and automated vehicles. He currently chairs the UNECE Task Force on Cybersecurity. So, Darren, I'm turning the screen over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I will just get my presentation up. So hopefully you can all see this now. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of our journey, really, in cybersecurity, my journey. So some of the challenges which really kick-started the work at the UNECE, why international action was needed, and then a very brief overview of the regulations, noting that some of my fellow presenters will be going into a bit more depth, so I don't want to steal their thunder. So the key challenge is, as you know, the world is getting more automated. Guido touched on some of the challenges this brings. So obviously, cars crashing, death. We also have a slightly more minor destruction of cars stopping working, which I think is probably more probable than the first one, and equally significant consequences for people owning vehicles, potentially. You've got disruption as well, traffic jams and issues to circulation, and then data that's held on the vehicles. So it's really, within the world of cyber and automotive, a lot of things that potentially could go wrong. And obviously, doing something about this all costs money. So the UK as a whole believes that to tackle this, we need to do this internationally. It can't be done just at a nation state, certainly the UK level. So we were asked to co-chair a task force with colleagues from Japan and latterly the US. My co-chair is in the audience, I see. And we were tasked in late 2016 to develop legislation to address the cyber threat to automotive, and also look at how software updates, which were already in use in 2016, could be better managed, especially with respect to maintaining safety type approvals. From this, from quite a nice journey with participants from many countries, different parts of the automotive industry, so vehicle manufacturers, suppliers, academics. We built from scratch these 2 regulations on cybersecurity and software update processes. I say it's a journey because first off, we had to work out what we wanted to cover, then what the regulations should look like, and then the really nitty-gritty of writing the regulations. So within this, we also tested the regulations to see whether they would work, whether they're workable, back in, I think, 2019. And fortunately, the results of that test did show that they're workable and would work, and they've now come into force. As the quite new type of regulations in the world of automotive, we also provide supplementary interpretation documents to further aid that interpretation of the regulations and to help harmonization between different countries across the globe. So one of the challenges was working out what we can and cannot regulate. So this is a picture of what we came up with quite early on in the life of the task force. The bits in blue are basically the bits on the vehicle. This we're pretty certain we can regulate, and could vehicle manufacturers in particularly are in control of what goes in the vehicle. The bits around the periphery are the things the vehicle talks to, interacts with. These are occasionally in control by the vehicle manufacturers, and sometimes such as communication channels, 5G, 4G, 3G, completely outside the control, largely of the vehicle manufacturers. So we concentrated the regulations on what can be controlled. This led to, as Guido said, cybersecurity regulation having two parts. I won't go into too much detail on these. One is the management. So what does the organisation need to look like to actually manage cybersecurity throughout the lifetime of the vehicle? So what do they need to do when they're designing it, and what do they need to do to look after it once it's in the field? And then actually, what does that vehicle need to look at, like the vehicle requirements? So this is adapting an approach which would give reassurance that the vehicle has been designed with cybersecurity in mind, but not saying exactly how the vehicle should be designed itself, which is an art. The software update process regulation is pretty similar. Again, it's that one of the key fundamentals is that management system. Can they QA configuration management processes in place for the actual software updates? Then what is the end-to-end process for creating and delivering those updates themselves? And then how easy is it to identify what software is on the vehicle, particularly the software pertaining to regulations? So these are the three key parts of the puzzle, the software update processes. I think it's also important to say that it's the update processes rather than the updates themselves which is regulated by R156. The reason for this is because the updates themselves will be regulated by and large by whatever function on the vehicle that they update or change. So whether it's the radio or the brakes, they will or will not fall under other regulations and the requirements within them. So it really focused on the processes. So here's some quick conclusions. So I think the first point to make, which I always make, is that the approach adopted is on the principle of risk reduction, showing that you know what the risks are and they've been proportionately reduced. It's not risk elimination. This is quite key because in the world of security, you're up against human actors and the world changes. So at one point you may have eliminated most of the probable risks, but the world changes 10 years later and a whole load of the risks change. Another important aspect is that actually the way we've developed it, it covers all sorts of levels of automation, from a vehicle that's got a low level connectivity to a fully automated vehicle, and all types of software updates. How they differ will be those risks, the tolerance of risks, and obviously if you haven't got a human driver able to react, then your tolerance of risk should be a lot lower. As I said, it focuses on the vehicle. And I think the last point is that software updates have been here for a very long time. I think the likes of McLaren have been using them for well over 20 years. So what the regulation brings is a secure and verifiable process for delivering them that is known and can be known. So hopefully this sets up the presentations and the talk for later. Thank you, and I'll hand back now. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Darren. Wow, you've been at this for a while. We've gone through the symposium sessions together. You've taken part in at least 2 of the sessions that we've had on this topic, and you and Kai Frederick have guided this process to the regulations that we have right now. But as you've probably are prepared for, there are going to be so many questions that maybe you've thought about the questions, but there will be a lot of questions that will come up now that people have to do the job of implementing them. One thing that came to mind that I'd like to ask you before we get to Kai Frederick is, you said that you're trying to focus on what can be done by the vehicle manufacturers. Who is responsible for what within doing what can be controlled by the vehicle manufacturers, but at the same time try to mitigate external factors through vehicle design. How do you think this can be done? I mean, who's responsible for this? Is it the vehicle manufacturers who are going to have to try to orchestrate all of this? Or do you see some other kind of organization that says, we've got the big picture, you do this, you do that, and then everything will work together?
In an ideal world, that would be lovely. But for instance, a lot of the communications will be done by the telecommunications companies, and that's an entirely different world to automotive. Guido touched on electricity supply. Again, that's an entirely different world to automotive. You could design, if we take electric cars, you can design in things such that you reduce the threat of either an effect on the grid or effect on the electric vehicle from hacking. It's possible. But so you know what the externalities are, and then it's being able to show you consider them, and then that you can control them. Given that vehicles are going to be on the road for quite a long time, it's quite unreasonable to say that you can control the future of telecommunications as a VM.
Yeah, well, we know we can't, because if you just take the example of telematic systems, like, for example, OnStar, they've already gone through 3 generations of systems, and people who have the earlier generations, they don't work anymore. But that's a fact of life when it comes to telecommunications. We started with amps, and now we're at someplace undefined, 5G. Okay, Darren, I've got a number of questions that I've set down here to ask when we have our panel discussion. But I want to thank you again. The applause are started in the background now. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to the questions later.
Yes, we're going to move to Kai Frederick Zastrow. Kai Frederick is one of the 30 master experts of Stellantis, and for those of you who have been in a closet somewhere and don't know that Stellantis is a company that's been put together by PSA and Fiat Chrysler. He has worked at Stellantis for the past 20 years. He's responsible for regulation, certification, and standards. Since its creation in 2016, he has been the industry spokesman for the UN Task Force on Cybersecurity and Software Updates. He's currently the chairman of the International Organization of Vehicle Manufacturers Technical Committee. So, Kai Frederick, I'm turning over the screen to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will share my screen. So I hope you can see my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Fine. Okay, good. Thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction. So I will give you now a more detailed focus on the Regulation 156 on software update and software update management systems. The structure of my presentation is here on the screen. So we will start with the objectives. What are the objectives of this regulation? And I come back to the general frame, global automotive standards and regulation in the field of cybersecurity and software updates. We have the United Nations with the 2 UN regulations, which you have already introduced, 155 on cybersecurity and 156 for software updates. We have in the ISO also activities on cybersecurity and on software updates with corresponding draft ISO standards under development. There are a lot of national standards, also national discussion ongoing. There are some European regulations which are not directly specific for the automotive world, but they may have an impact. China is also very active with some specific working groups also for automotive cybersecurity. And last but not least, United States with the well-known NHTSA guidelines for cybersecurity. So this is the worldwide panorama, and you can see the UN regulations which are adopted in June last year. They are really worldwide collaboration, so developed under the GRVA. And in the GRVA, there's a task force on cybersecurity chaired by UK. We have seen the presentation by Darren, by Japan and USA. So this is really worldwide collaboration, those 2 UN regulations. And so there are 2 regulations which are really specific to the automotive world. Now, why we need a specific regulation for software updates? I focus really on the regulation 156. So there's a need for software updates. More and more vehicles become connected vehicles. That means in the past, you could buy a vehicle, drive it during 30 years without any update of the software. And this is not possible anymore when the vehicle becomes connected. There's a need to update the software during the whole vehicle life. So if you want to drive it during 30 years, you need to update this software regularly for different reasons, be it safety, cybersecurity, but also for the simple reason that you want to add new features. So some vehicle manufacturers, they add new functions, new ADAS functions over the air on already registered vehicles. So this is what happens today. And for this reason, there's really a need for regulation to make this more clear, what is allowed, what is not allowed, in order to ensure that the software on a vehicle is and stays compliant with the vehicle type approval. Because you have approved a vehicle before registration, now you must be sure that when you change the software, the vehicle stays compliant. This is a very important point, and this is the main objective of this regulation on software update. Now, what are the requirements of the regulation 156? The scope are all vehicles that permit software updates, be it over the air or via by wire, via the OBD port. Any kind of software update of a vehicle is in the scope of regulation 156. So we have already seen this scheme by Darren. There are 3 important parts. The first is a software update management system. That means it is the organizational structure by the vehicle manufacturer, the internal processes, how he manages software evolution, software updates, software identification. The second part is specific to the vehicle. So there are vehicle requirements, how to execute an update on vehicle in a safe manner, how to inform the vehicle user, how to identify specific software on a specific vehicle. And those 2 parts are in the UN regulation 156. This is part of the 156 regulation. Now, the third part, this is introduced in each system regulation where it is necessary. There is a general definition in the RE3. This is a consolidated resolution by the UN, which gives recommendation how the so-called RX-Win can be introduced in existing regulations. The RX-Win is the regulation X software identification number. That means a method how to identify software on a vehicle, which is specific to regulation X. And regulation X can be A, B, C, and so on. So we will have an RA SWIN, RB SWIN, and so on for any system regulation, be it braking, steering, emissions, whatever you want. You may have a specific RX SWIN in order to identify the level of software on the vehicle which is compliant to the regulation. And the first regulation which uses this RX SWIN is regulation 157. This is for the LKS, the automatic lane keeping systems. That means autonomous vehicles with level 3 and higher. And there's, of course, it's the most urgent to have this RX SWIN defined. So this is a general framework for the software update. I continue now with the process for software update, which is part of the interpretation document. So the first point is that the vehicle manufacturers get a general quality control process to ensure that he's able to design software and to update software on the vehicles. And now when we have a new software update available, the question is there an impact on the vehicle certification? Yes or no? If not, if there's no impact, the vehicle manufacturer has to verify that the update can be performed in a safe and secure manner and may provide the update recorded. If there's a certification impact, he has to contact his type approval authority in order to make an extension of the type approval of the vehicle and to test again the new software, whether it's compliant. If it is compliant, he will get an extension of the type approval, verifies that the update can be done, and then may provide the update. And the type approval authority may at any time check by audit that those processes are really ensured internally. Now, some concrete examples for the software update management system requirements. So it's not exhaustive, just to give you some ideas what are requirements in the regulation for the management system. The vehicle manufacturer shall record and store specific information for each update applied to a given vehicle type. So you need to trace what you have developed, what you did. You have to trace purpose of the update, what systems or functions of the vehicle of the may impact, whether those systems have an impact on type approved systems, how the update may be executed, and how to confirm that the software update has undergone adequate verification validation. So these are some examples for the software update management system requirements. There's a second part in the regulation which refers to the vehicle type, especially also for over-the-air updates. And here also some examples of the requirements. The vehicle shall be able to restore systems to their previous version in case of a failed update. It's really a vehicle requirement. We have to ensure that there's enough power to make an update. The vehicle user shall be able to be informed about the impact of any software update on his vehicle. And also in a situation where the execution of a software update whilst driving may not be safe, you have to ensure that the vehicle cannot be driven or the driver is sufficiently informed. And after the execution of the update, the vehicle user shall also be able to be informed about the successful update. So this is the requirement for the vehicle, and all vehicles of the vehicle manufacturer which use the same technical solution to provide software updates can be in the same vehicle type. So you need one type approval for a vehicle type which covers different vehicles which use the same technical solution. Now, again, one practical example for this famous RX SWIN. So definition, RX SWIN is regulation X software identification number, is a dedicated identifier representing information about the software that is type approval relevant with regard to regulation X. So let's take a very practical case. You have a steering system, a vehicle steering system, maybe with others, and the steering system is type approved with regard to UN regulation 79. So at the time of type approval, you will define an R79 SWIN, and in my example here, it's called 0023, just a number which is defined at the type approval. And this is available at the system type approval certificate. The approval authority knows, okay, the steering system software is identified with the R79 SWIN 0023. Now this vehicle can be produced, put on the market, used. You want to change the software of the steering system with an impact on the certification. Imagine you change the ADAS tuning, you want to improve the ADAS system, add new features, then you can develop the new software and make an extension of the vehicle type approval. So RxWin may change then to 24. You make an extension 1 of the type approval. So both softwares now are type approved. You can, as vehicle manufacturer, inform that this new RxWin is available, and you can even retrofit it on already registered vehicles. You can clarify on which vehicles it is allowed to retrofit this new software to improve the functionality. The vehicle owner may be informed about the new software available and can then update the vehicle, and if necessary, change also the registration of the vehicle if something changes which is defined in the registration. And last but not least, the authorities, they can check police control or periodic technical inspection whether the software on a specific vehicle on the road is compliant to type approval, yes or no. Next question, what are the application dates? So to recall, the regulations have been adopted last year and entered into force in January of this year. So that means the UN member states, they can now require those regulations in their legal framework. So the very first country which introduced these regulations is Japan. So both regulations have a clear application schedule. They are already required for any autonomous vehicle of level 3 or higher since last year. And then there's an introduction schedule for the other vehicles during the next years. European Commission, European Union has defined the introduction dates for the cybersecurity regulation R155, and the introduction dates for the regulation 156 are currently under preparation. They are not yet defined for the European Union. The last question, what are the next steps? So you can see currently, for example, that what is today already possible, the manufacturer makes a new software. So he has to apply for an extension of a type approval, and he can get an extension of the type approval. That means the new software will become compliant, type approved, etc. The United Nations needs still to identify which are the regulations, the system regulations, which need to integrate the RxWin. And this is an open point. Currently, it's only regulation 157, automated lane keeping system. At the United Nations, countries need to decide what are other system regulations which have a high impact on software. This is one thing which needs to be done. And the second thing is now you can update the vehicles which are already registered. And also this needs to be clarified, harmonized at national, regional level in the registration regulation of any country. So we wait for the timing implementation dates for regulation 156 itself, and also for the open points you can see here on the screen. So those are the next steps. And I just finish with the link to the regulation text. So we have for each regulation 155 an interpretation document, for 156 an interpretation document, which gives some more detailed interpretation. And last but not least, the UN task force is still working on a set of technical requirements which can be used by countries which have no type approval regime, as for instance the United States. So the idea is to have a harmonized requirement set that can be used worldwide, even for countries which are not in the 1958 agreement, or even if they have no type approval system, that we have a maximum of technical harmonization. So this is the outlook for the next step. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Hi, Frederick. This is fantastic. Really, very, very good overview of the software update process. I think a lot of people who are taking part in our session today may not be totally aware of this differentiation between countries that are using type approval and countries that are not using type approval. And I think we'll take that up in our panel discussion. It's a very important issue. You've talked about this will apply for the entire life of the vehicle. I saw someone driving around in a 1961 Volkswagen the other day, and it looked brand new. Are we going to be thinking about cars that will be on the market for 50 years, or is there some date when we say, well, okay, after 10 years or after 15 years, we have to forget about this car and put it into another classification? What do you think?
I think this we will learn. We will see in the next years what happens on the market. I think the regulation framework is now ready to update those vehicles. So the regulation is open to permit it. And then the question is, from a technical engineering point of view, what is feasible and what is really done on the market. I think now what is very good, regulation is not anymore a hard point. Before you could say, yeah, it's not clear how to regulate and I'm allowed, what can I do? Now everybody has a clear framework how he can update a vehicle in a safe and secure manner, what are the rules, how to keep the vehicle compliant over the whole lifetime, and how it is done. I think it's now up to the players to make good designs which are flexible, that can be updated. This is not up to regulation to decide how the design shall be done and what are the technical solutions to comply with the regulation.
Okay, thank you very much, Kai Frederick. We look forward to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to move to Matthew Mackay. Matthew is the Senior Risk Manager, Products Cybersecurity for General Motors. He leads a diverse team that focuses on governance, risk, compliance, and monitoring, and response activities for GM's product cybersecurity team. Prior to joining GM, Matt served in the U.S. Navy for 23 years in a variety of roles, including submarine nuclear engineering and surface ship combat systems validation and deployment. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Michael, thank you very much. Let me get my presentation up for everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and I would like to share with you at least one OEM's initial efforts to start really looking at how to achieve CSMS certification and how to tie in 21434, which I already saw a question in the Q&A, in order to achieve type approval. So tying those together, I will quickly go through a quick overview of 21434 in order to further the narrative that I'll share with you. We'll move into R155 a little bit, and then we'll get into an adversarial attack framework that might be a solution in order to really help achieve CSMS. Okay, so starting with 21434, the biggest thing that I want to point out is clause 8, which really focuses on risk assessment methods. And what I've highlighted in blue, it's really about managing cybersecurity risk. I find this to be the center of gravity of the standard, especially as it pertains to CSMS. So let's look at R155, and highlighted in blue, I'd like to draw your attention. There are two main sections that OEMs will need to comply with. One is the requirements for the cybersecurity management system, and CSMS is highlighted in green. The second portion down below is 7.3 actual requirements for vehicle types, but I'm going to focus on the cybersecurity management system at least for this presentation. You can see, and this is a very, very generalized, simplified version of how do you comply with both 7.2 and 7.3. And what I'm attempting to draw your attention to is that CSMS is really a strong focus. So let's dive into CSMS a little bit. What is CSMS really about? What is it requiring OEMs to attest to? As you can see in the highlights, it's really focused on risk and mitigations, especially Guido already mentioned, I believe it was Guido who talked about Annex 5, someone did, I believe, I may not recall exactly who mentioned it. There's a lot of process compliance, a lot of management of risks. You can see on the bottom too, we talk about processes again used to provide relevant data to support analysis of attempted or successful cyber attacks. So there's the real focus here is on how well do you OEM identify, manage, transfer, control, track, update your risk assessment processes. Okay, so now that we know that clause 8 in 21434 which I think is really the heart of the standard about risk. R155 CSM is really talking about that. You can kind of see the corollary here between the two, in that even in their top level kind of opening executive summary statements, the yellows kind of correspond to a systematic risk-based approach defining organizational processes, and in 21434 provide a clear, comprehensible, and defensible rationale supported by evidence. In the green, treating risks, in the green down here, achieving a sufficient degree of cybersecurity for a specific application in a specific environment. And the only way that you can do that is by understanding your risk. Another tie-in between R155 and 21434 is a little bit more explicit. Interpretation documents exist. The one that you see on the right is an older version, but the latest version, which I believe was released in November of last year, refers to 21434 extensively. So it's a good bet that in order to achieve CSMS, relying on or at least being able to demonstrate your compliance with 21434 is a good way to do that. So let's talk about it. I've said enough about the focus of risk assessment. Let's get into 21434. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but I'll draw your attention to the upper left. The risk assessment concept is to be able to determine risk. And you do that by determining the risk value of a threat scenario. A threat scenario is tied to a damage scenario, and a damage scenario is tied to the compromise of a cybersecurity property. So pretty classical definition of risk. When you move into execution below that, we get into the notion of attack path analysis, which continues to pop up through Clause 8. So identification and linking of potential attack paths to one or more threat scenarios. And in requirement 8.8, the threat scenario shall be analyzed to describe possible attack paths. Okay, so knowing that, and the real summary over here is you have your threat and risk assessment on the right side, and you can see how I need to move my screen because it's in the way there, that the attack path realizes the threat scenario. So a way that at least we're choosing to think about that right now is that attack paths really form a good way in order to kind of thread the needle through all of 21434, CSMS, and R155. So what we really need is an automotive adversarial attack model. And so what we're exploring and actively developing is MITRE has that adversarial attack framework. Right now, it exists for enterprise mobile and ICS domains. And so within the Auto ISAC, we are working with members in order to develop an automotive-based framework. You can see a very rough early version here. We intend to have this public facing once the first version is approved for public consumption and feedback. And again, it's inspired by MITRE attack. We're calling it loosely the Auto Threat Matrix, ATM, right now. Overloaded term, that's where we are right now. So for us, the next steps are to instrument. Basically, we need to develop a repeatable, reliable, robust, tailored to each OEM's risk tolerance, a threat model. We intend to do that by showing attack paths via this ATM. We've done that with known attacks. Some of the ones are Keen Lab against Tesla, which are in the public domain, some research. So we're able to demonstrate that, yes, the model does work in order to do that. And so the intent would be to instrument it appropriately so that you can, the output of that would be your initial risk assessment. Okay, so that's good. So now we've, hopefully if things work out, we've met the initial goal of determining risk. Well, how do we put all of this together? So maybe a way to think about this is if you start with item attributes of your component, of your item. So if it's Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, or if it's an ADAS module, what have you, that brings with it generally known attacks that occur that compromise one of the features of the item. From that, we could tailor an auto threat matrix to get an initial inherent risk or residual risk after we identify controls. We'll perform the TERA. This will help us identify and assign appropriate cybersecurity goals. From those tailored cybersecurity goals based on analysis of known attack paths, we can then specify the supporting security controls, which we then deliver and partner with our suppliers in order to ensure that we achieve compliance with that. So that is a very quick walkthrough of how at least one OEM, how we're thinking about it in GM in order to help achieve certificate of CSMS and by extension type approval. So that's what I have for you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. You've used the term we. Are you referring to we within GM, or we as a group of outside of GM, others like your suppliers and maybe other OEMs in the US or everywhere? Great question. Thanks for asking, Michael. We really want this to be a big tent. The more eyes, the more input, the better we think the framework can be. It is being incubated within the Auto ISAC right now, but as I mentioned, it will be hopefully soon publicly available, and we will invite comments. When I say that, we being the people at least who are managing within the Auto ISAC in its initial development period. But our goal is, if it's worthy of community involvement and engagement and people find value in it, we would really like to see a coalescing around it, because it does, I think, at least it simplifies, maybe it clarifies the path to CSMS, and maybe it standardizes a little bit about how to talk about attack paths with respect to 21434. Every company is different, and they have their own internal risk assessment processes, whether it's model-based or whatever it is. Our intent is certainly not to cause anyone to abandon what they already have in place, but is to serve as a model that you could potentially use if you'd like. And Auto ISAC, can you just brief, who is it, who's in it? Auto ISAC is currently, we're 67 members. Most of the, in fact, all the OEMs who sell vehicles in North America. Most of the suppliers who both supply North American and European OEMs. There is a European Auto ISAC. There's a Japan Auto ISAC. The European Auto ISAC is still forming, still in development, doing really, really awesome work with periodic workshops. So that is certainly one way for suppliers and OEMs to become engaged, share threat information, and work on projects like this. Okay, excellent. As with all the other presentations, we're all going to come back to yours. That's lots of great information. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Michael. And, yeah. Okay, I'm going to move to Patrick Teppo. Patrick is the expert security architecture for Ericsson. He is one of a handful of security experts in Ericsson, with the main focus on security architecture, including both network and implementation architecture aspects when building telco products and systems. Before this, Patrick was driving the threat modeling risk assessment methodology in Ericsson and the implementation of a new product security framework to be integrated into all Ericsson products. Patrick, it's all yours.
Thank you, Michael. So let's start sharing. So I hope you can see my slides here. So as Michael said, yeah, I'm coming from Ericsson. It's a bit different now when we're talking mainly about inside the cars for software updates and cybersecurity. Ericsson, we are a network provider providing equipment to 5G and other telco systems. So then if you take the 5G systems, yes, the cars, when they are connected, they need, of course, to have a mobility, cellular connectivity, and of course 5G is one way to provide this, which is also can be used for much more than just software or firmware updates. We have it there for telematics. We can use it also for local or narrow communication, V2V or other V2X applications, and also coming automotive, autonomous connected cars and so on. So to start, I took a a figure that we have in a document we wrote, a report we wrote a couple of years ago on ATIS, where we looked at securing the connected cars. You have different kinds of connectivity in your car. You have local areas connecting up to the users. But that could be via a phone or some other narrow communication technologies. We need to connect up the cars to the OEMs, their applications, and of course other cloud applications and so on, and services provided. And there we have many ways to do this. In the telco, of course, we have the cellular networks from 3G, 4G, and 5G, but there could be also other ways to doing it, via, for example, satellite or other ways. And then, of course, all these connected connectivity paths need, of course, then to be secured. And what we have done in this work here is also discussed how you're securing these ones, depending on a different type of communication you're using and how you're building up the security. If you take the telco network, say a 5G, and how do we building up the security there? So everything is based on, we need to start from how do we securing the hardware, how do we securing the software. It's also been discussed before today as well, more like in the car, the components in the car or the software in the car. Same goes for the telco. If you take the devices, we starting with a hardware that we use for protecting our identities and credentials, the SIM card, which then includes the main keys for authenticating with a network. Also the software itself, we need to have secure as well, so we know that the right software is running on the hardware so they can connect to the network. And this goes also in our networks, the radio networks, the core networks, and the applications we're running there, and the applications and the users on the side. We're basing the connectivity on these identities we can use for authenticate, authorize communication, and then provide securing the data sent over it, cryptography or an integrity protection. To be able to do this, we need to manage each of them, both from a security and identity perspective, both locally, so that you have the right software and so on in place, but also the identities and so on, because you need identities in two places, at least, to talk to each other, or in many places in some other cases. On the bottom part, I also have some of the main security functions that we're using in the different areas. For example, in the radio side, all the communication from the radio side to the core network, but the radio sides that we protect with IPsec. That's the common way to using for network protection in telco networks. Security gateways are needed in some cases. The PKI, we're using PKI certificates as the base for all identification, and then building IPsec security on top. Then when you're coming more into the core network, and then when you're roaming, say, in different countries, and you need to be able to communicate between different network operators, different countries, you have the roaming security, where we have had issues in earlier releases of for example 3D people, like in 3D and so on, there were a bit less security. But now in 5D, we have a secure a proxy between the operators to SEP. We also have firewalls for the user planes and all those in place, and then other functionality like DNS protections and so on. And then when we're coming out to internet, there is the firewalling on the GI interfaces. We have carrier NATs and other kinds of security functionality we can build on top. So that's the platform where we can provide secure communications from the device all the way to applications and to users. Just quickly then on what the main, then when coming into connected cars and software and firmware updates, but those other communication, as I said, we have trusted identities, and we store the credentials in hardware module on the SIM. There are newer versions coming out. Before there were a plastic card with a chip. Now there is embedded versions. It's still the same technique, but they can then be managed over there remotely. Networks are built for zero trust. all interfaces are mutually authenticated, authorized, all data is protected, and so on. We have confidentiality integrity protection of all interfaces. Still, there are places where we actually build this in hop-by-hop fashion because of the regulations of the telco network, for example, for legal intercept. The security identity management, yes, we have it end-to-end from the device all the way to the cloud applications. Also, we have the possibility to separate, isolate different kinds of traffic on the networks. Before, it has been more based on different data connectivity, APN networks, and so on. Now we also have the techniques for using slicing and so on, where we can, for example, have some kind of data or communication center with certain slice, and then others, mobile broadband on other slices, to separate and isolate, so there is potentially no effect between those different networks. Yes, that was quickly my part to discussing a bit on what we do from a telco perspective to secure the software and the communication with the cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much. I think there are going to be a lot of questions on the particular both requirements and responsibilities of the telcos when we get to the whole issue. I mean, if we didn't have connectivity, or maybe we can put it another, or I could put it another way, would we have cybersecurity issues if we didn't have connectivity? And what would our cars look like today and in the near term future without that connectivity? I mean, we've taken connectivity as a given. We have used it for infotainment, for safety, advanced driver assistance systems, but it's because we've connected our car that we have these issues today. So I think one of the big questions that I have, because I've been working with connected cars since before they were connected, and during that time we've had a number of technology changes. We've gone from amps to 2G, 3G, 4G, and now we're moving into 5G. And every time we make these changes, we have issues in the vehicle with lack of backward compatibility. And that's something I think we do want to discuss when we get to the panel discussion. But do you see the telecommunications industry taking this into account when they're pushing new technologies? And if so, what are they doing to minimize the damage that occurs when we do move from a 2G to 3G and 4G?
Yeah, I think in the case, I think that's a very good question, actually. If you take, for example, the 2G and the generations coming after that, it's very much depending also how you building or what kind of modems and so on you're using in your devices or in the cars. If they have support like for different generations of the telco systems, standards itself allows it, and of course we're building 5G and 4G, but we have been improving the security and also other functionality, of course, in 5G, so we'll be even better than 4G, and the same goes for 4G to 3G. So, but it's depending also on devices. From the network side, I would say we and also the other vendors, we're now providing base stations, radio access, which have support for all of them. But of course, there is a lot of dependencies on the modem side you have in the car, if they will support, or also like if different bands or different versions as well will be possible to use between the different generations.
Okay, we're gonna come back to it, Patrick. We've got some questions for you when we return after the break. We're going to have a 10-minute break right now. We've been at this for almost an hour and a half. When we come back from the break, we will begin with our panel discussion, and yeah, look forward to having you back. I hope everyone will be back. We've got 164 participants I see right now, which is very good. So, Stefano?
I think we're gonna put up the slides for 10 minutes break now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Hello, Michael. Are you with us? I can see you.
Are we back?
We are back. We are ready to start the next session, please.
Okay.
You are live, Mike.
Okay. Welcome back. I hope you had a good break.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if we have, yes, we have people coming back in as well. We have approximately an hour and a half left to our session today. I'd like to thank our four speakers for setting the stage for our panel discussion. We have a fifth panelist. Svante Westphal is the acting director of the Institute for Security and Safety at the Brandenburg University of Applied Sciences. She is a colleague of Guido Glutschke. Guido is not able to continue with us today, and Svante is representing the University of Applied Sciences. She coordinates the research and development for ISS, especially with a focus on new developments in cybersecurity. She's the Institute's representative at the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group on Information and Communication Technology in International Security, and also, together with ISS Director Guido Glutschke, in UNECE's WP29 Working Party on Automated, Autonomous, and Connected Vehicles. So you're very welcome, Svante, to join the panel. We have a lot of questions. I think our panelists, as well as Guido in his keynote introduction, gave us an awful lot of areas where we have maybe have had our questions, some of the questions that we came into our discussion, our session today with. But as I listened, more questions popped up. As I said, I've seen all of the presentations. I was able to go through them and think about some of the questions that we might be asking. But as I listened, more questions came up. The main question that I addressed to Guido was, are the regulations enough? And I'm going to bring Svante right into our panel discussion by addressing the first question to her. What are the issues with cybersecurity and software updates that you feel still haven't been adequately addressed? What are some of the holes that you've identified that you think we need to start filling?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Well, the holes we need filling. Okay, where do I start? No, it's also thank you very much for the other panelists for their presentations earlier. Great presentations, all of them, and I really enjoyed listening. And I felt the very same, Michael, as you. More questions in my head popped up. And as you're now asking me, I think it goes in the same direction as, are we ready to deploy? And I say, it's a definite yes and no, both of them at the same time. As with all regulations, it's the same, everything which is new. There are people who really have been preparing and doing their best to already establish the infrastructures and the communication ways and everything. They've anticipated as much as they can. Probably, as Matthew Mackay was a very good example, being into the whole topic very early. And I think most of the OEMs are, at least most of them whom I've been talking to. But as always, when things are new, it needs time, and people need time to discuss it and get it into motion and setting the processes until everyone's on board. And Guido already mentioned, there are some suppliers, especially the big ones, who are very well prepared, and they've created research groups and formed circles of communication, and within the departments of the whole company, they try to form task forces to make things possible and to react to the UN regulations. But there are smaller ones, and they are struggling. Some of them have until February not even heard of the UN regulation. So this is going to be a tough nut to crack. And everyone is going, I'm sure if you ask me whether there are gaps, yes, of course there are. It's new. That's what's happening with new things. But on the other hand, I think we have to rely and trust on people doing all their best, because none of them has an interest in their car crashing somewhere or the whole fleet not going anymore. That would be a bad reputation either for the tier 1s or 2s or the OEMs. So I think everyone's giving their best, but as it's all still new, we need some time to develop.
Well, it seems like the time frame has been established. Is it enough time? I mean, do we really think that everything that needs to be done can be done within this time? And if not, then why did we establish a time frame in the first place? I'm going to open that question to the others, but I'll ask you.
I mean, obviously, this question has been discussed in the working group, and probably Darren will be able to to give more feedback on that. But from my opinion, it has been discussed, and there was a big discussion about it. How do we set the time frame? And I think everyone was on the same page. I mean, it's a consensus agreement at the end that it is doable in this amount of time. Otherwise, we wouldn't have set that date.
Darren, do you, since you're leading up this group, what do you think?
So there's never a good time to regulate, to be honest, especially in an entirely new regulation. There's always going to be somebody who just hasn't clocked what's going on. But I think in terms of the journey of the task force and the journey of the suppliers and vehicle manufacturers within the task force, you could see kind of it's helping them build up the capacity, argue we need money to do this, so we got the capability, and I think those who are ahead of the game, so to speak. So it needed to be done, and it needed to be done arguably yesterday, and we did make sure it was as good as it could be by the time it entered in. It's probably not going to be perfect. We're probably going to find things that work, things that don't work quite so well, or things that work in one area of the world better than in other areas. But again, this is kind of to be expected with new regulation anyway. So yeah, that's kind of a short answer.
Matt, you were on the receiving end, both Matt and Kai Frederick, of the companies that have to actually implement this. What do you think about the time frame? Well, actually, Matt, this might not be a good time to have the discussion about type approval versus non-type approval, because as of this point, it doesn't seem that it's really affecting the North American market. So I'll turn that question to Kai Frederick, and we're going to come back to. I'll come back to you. So from the European standpoint, we've got a time frame that's been set, Kai, that looking at it from someone who has worked on implementations of systems in vehicles, I think that there's not enough time. That's my opinion. But what do you think?
So at first, let me say, even without any regulation, the vehicle industry needs to do measures for cybersecurity. Yeah? I think everybody agrees on this. So the industry does not wait for regulation to act. It's very important to state this at first. So without regulation, we would have a lot of different systems for cybersecurity. And the main objective of the regulation is to define some mandatory basic requirements for everybody to ensure a certain minimum level. Of course, there will be done much more than just replying to the regulation, but I think it makes absolutely sense to say we do not wait, because we know everybody, the vehicle manufacturers, but also the suppliers, they work on cybersecurity for a long time already, and it's not a new topic. But what is new now, that we get a regulation. And today we have vehicles in the street which are more or less cyber secure, but there is no regulation at all. So we are in a vacuum. And I think the consumer cannot accept this. They cannot accept that there is we have a lot of regulations for crash tests, for braking, for steering, and we have no regulation for cybersecurity. So it's a so important topic. I think we cannot leave it open completely. So it's absolutely logic that we come to a regulation. Now, the application dates are well defined for Japan. We have seen in my presentation, Japan is one of the first countries who make both regulations mandatory. In the European Union, the schedule for the cybersecurity 155 is well defined. And I think it will not change. So it makes no sense to say we need more time or less time. I think it's unrealistic it has been adopted by the Parliament, by the Council of the European Union. I don't see that the time will change. So we need to live with those dates. We have also seen that for the 156, the implementation dates in European Union are not yet fixed. And I see this is one of the questions, what is the best estimate for the implementation of 156 in the European Union? Well, of course, it's up to the European Union to decide what is the best implementation date. But what I can see from my personal point of view, Japan is a very good example because they made a differentiated application of the software update. You have, on the one hand, you have vehicles where the vehicle manufacturer does already suggest updates with impact on type approval for other systems or for other things. So for those vehicles, it may be urgent to have a very soon application of 156. But you have other vehicles that are not foreseen to have any software update, and then it makes no sense to require 156, and mandatory 156 may even stop the production of those vehicles. So I see a vehicle which has not all those features with over the air. Why do we need to apply 156 very early? Because there is no issue, and it may kill some vehicles from being sold. There's no added value for the customer. So I think for the 156, Japan is a good example, and we need really a differentiated implementation schedule depending what kind of vehicle you put to the market. So if the vehicle is let's say, a highly automated vehicle which has autonomous driving, I think it's very logic that we need to update the vehicle, and there may be a good reason to have 156 very early mandatory, as we have it in Japan since last year. But for other vehicles, if you have old electronic architectures, they are not foreseen for any update. I don't see a need to have a very soon application of 156, and it would be even a showstopper for some nice vehicles which are sold today, which have not any problem. And I think there is no added value to have this a generalized mandatory application of 156 in the European Union.
Okay, Matt. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What if you could sort of encapsulate the situation in North America? GM is approaching this. You've identified how you're approaching this. It looks like something that's going to be complex to implement. These kinds of things don't happen overnight. There needs to be putting a management system like this in place for cybersecurity. If we focus on cybersecurity, is not a something you just do by rolling on a bed. And at the same time, can you address the issue of North America not being a type approval, self-certification?
I can, and my answer it may not get to the nuance that you want, because I'll tell you my approach.
Mm-hmm.
Our approach at GM of course, we plan on selling vehicles in UN countries. So our approach is to go full type approval. We haven't carved out any exceptions to align with any agreed upon North America kind of finalization. So since we're taking the kind of head down, we plan on preserving market access for us to introduce vehicles when our plans deem it. So we have gone ahead. We meet Ronak Shah as part of our regulatory team. We've been meeting with technical services to understand what is the attestation, what is the evidence that technical services will be looking for. And I'll back up a little bit and I'll tell you, before, I'd say last year, I was naively living in a bubble. We were focused on our existing cybersecurity management system processes with our eye on any potential legislation that may have been coming up in North America in Congress. And we were participating in 21434. Once we had a moment of reckoning when it became clear that R155 was going to be a thing, as Kai has just talked about. There's no good time for regulation, but there is a good time to wake up and realize we need to change how we do things internally. So we did. We re-architected our team. We proceeded to get buy-in from our senior leadership. It's actually an opportunity for us to implement some internal governance changes that we've been long looking to do, but it's very hard to do, to disrupt timing and patterns and to get the buy-in from teams external to our product cybersecurity team. So really opportunistically and selfishly, this has been a really good opportunity for us to have the buy-in that we need to implement the changes that we're thinking about. And as another happy coincidence, it does look like what may emerge from North American regulation laws bubbling up. The Solarium Commission, they're not laws, but there are a lot of suggestions for cybersecurity laws, some regarding suppliers, vulnerability management. There's a Self-Drive Act. We have a Michigan representative, Representative Debbie Dingell, who is she's stated very plainly. She intends to introduce regulation for the North American market that touches on vehicle cybersecurity. So what we do see also is any changes that we make with an eye towards CSMS compliance is naturally going to help us likely attest and comply with anything that might be signed into law in the United States. Very long answer, kind of revealed a lot of our thinking internally. So agree with Kai, there's never a great time to be regulated, and not because we don't need to be doing these things, but everybody understands how complex automotive is, and timelines are tough to decouple and restart again. So from my perspective, I'm happy that this is occurring. So don't hold me to that though. Just kidding.
Okay, so Matt and Kai, you believe that the automotive industry can meet a 2024 implementation of cybersecurity, UN 155, meet those requirements? Yes.
For me, this is a fact, and we cannot change. It's a decision. European Union has decided, the Parliament has voted, European Council is, so it's the law. We have to apply the law, and the same for Japan. Now the application dates are published. So we have, if we want to produce vehicles for those markets, we have to be compliant. That's a fact. And I think it's very well known for cybersecurity. It's the first time. So it's always a little scary. If you do something for the very first time in your life, of course, you're not comfortable. You cannot say, oh, no problem, I will do it. I've never done before, but I'm sure it's no problem. No, of course, there will be problems. But I think one very strong point for the UN regulations, there are W29 meets 3 times a year. So if we discover in the next year some problems, it's very easy to adapt the regulation text. I think that's a very important point. So it's a dynamic requirement, a dynamic regulation. It is not written now and then applied for the next 10 years. I'm sure there will be improvements, but it's too early today without having applied them to know what are the main improvements. So I hope we will all work now on the type approval of our vehicles. We will have type approved all the vehicles at the latest for July 2024 in European Union. Mm-hmm. And then we know what are the hard points, and we can correct, no problem. We can change the regulation every year, even 3 times a year if it's necessary. So if the United Nations member states, they know what they want to change, if they agree to change, it's very easy to change the regulation if it's necessary. So I think no problem. Probably the current regulation is not yet good enough and it will need to be improved, but we can only learn by doing. It makes no sense to say, I wait until the regulation is perfect. It will never happen. We have to use it, to apply it, and then we will see what are the hard points, and then we can try to improve it together. So it's really a dynamic improvement of the requirements. It's not just one static requirement and then we have to apply it for the next century.
If I may.
Yes, please.
I think what is of utmost importance now is that all of us talk with each other, because we have to find ways, especially the way the OEMs are going to communicate with tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, especially in that direction. I mean, they will have to find ways on how to control that cybersecurity was applied and was thought through in all their management systems, all the line down. It's complicated, I know. And exactly for that reason, because it's that complicated, all of us need to think about ways how we can certify that, how we can establish this trust that what you get in your car is the correct one. And now I'm talking from a supplier's perspective. Somebody just recently told me, okay, so now we have this OEM, he's well prepared, and he already gave me that list of things that we need to do. And then he is also a supplier for another OEM, and he has another and a different list. And then the number of lists are growing. So even if you find ways to do it on a national level, as our VDA is doing now on the German basis, then we still have OEMs and suppliers working all around the world with each other. So when we have good practices and best practices of doing that, we need to share this all around the world with everyone, so we can quickly get a system in motion which will help everyone to build trust between each other, and in the end create safe vehicles on the road.
Any other thoughts on this question of timing? Okay. Let's talk about this software management updating system. A few years ago, I was asked by the ITU to address the business side of over-the-air software updating. A number of companies already claim that they do software updating. There is one company that says everything we do is based on software updating. You know, you don't need to take your car into the workshop anymore. We know that's not the case, but that's their claim. Other companies have started with updating of navigable map data and infotainment systems. Now we're looking at real updating, software and firmware updating. And when I address that issue from the business standpoint, there is an enormous set of requirements on how you manage software updating from the customer standpoint. And we all know that when we come up, get our telephone or turn our computer on, almost every day there's a software update that's waiting for us, and it does something to us. Either we have to restart the computer if it's a big one, or something else happens, and we know that every time we update our iPhone or our Android phones, something doesn't work the way it did work before, or someone, as we said, maybe we can't use our car because the software updating is taking place. if I have to get my child to the hospital because he's fallen down and split his lip, and he needs stitches and he's bleeding all over the place, I'm not going to get in my car and worry about whether or not I can take the car to the hospital without having to wait for software updates. How do we look at this component of the software updating, this software updating management system? Okay, it does everything that we think it needs to do from the supplier side, from the software side, but how do we coordinate that with the lives of the individuals whose vehicles are being updated? Who wants to take this one?
So if I just from the regulatory point of view, this is one of the many discussions we had. So every update is going to be slightly different. And it's knowing those instructions and that control and how it works with the end user. So we've envisaged the different ranges of updates from those which won't affect the driving, those that may, through to those where you actually need to take the vehicle to a technician to get something recalibrated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the requiring the manufacturer to have processes where they can clearly state how the end user will treat that, and limiting actually some cases when over-the-air updates can be done. So in that case of needing a technician to interfere, actually that's not suitable for over-the-air updating, because I certainly wouldn't be tinkering with my vehicle to finish off an update. And you wouldn't expect the vast majority of the population to either. So it was an interesting discussion. It will very much depend on the update itself. I wouldn't expect that if the update takes 5 minutes to take place, that it would start automatically, unless you set your car to do it automatically, in which case, as the end user, it's probably on you. So it's kind of the nub of some of the discussions we had when formulating the information package and the handling of those updates within the software update management system.
Matt, any thoughts on that?
I do. And I'm not part of this team at GM. We have a team that's focused on customer experience. And there's a healthy tension between what the customer experience team wants to do and compliance requirements for something like software updates. So there needs to be very clear collaboration and consistent communication across. So the customer experience team can maximize a clean, consistent, transparent engagement with the customer, and we can be fully compliant with regulations. So as an example, maybe in a future state, I'm not just thinking out loud, a customer is preconditioned that there is an update waiting for their car by a mobile phone announcement. Perhaps that conditions the customer to understand, okay, I do have an update, but I'm going to choose not to ignore the dialogue in the vehicle, and I'm going to plan my day when I know I don't have any occasion to leave the house, and then I will start my update. And of course, there are rollbacks and safeguards in order to exit out of that. In the case of the split lip and needing to use the vehicle very, very quickly for an emergent situation, that's all part of systems engineering and ensuring that the timing is sufficient in order to support emergency use of that vehicle. But yeah, there's that communication between different teams to understand that how customers are engaged in the process is consistent and transparent and is not a negative experience is very important. It's kind of when regulation hits customer experience a little bit.
Patrick, I'm gonna bring you in here. How does the telecoms industry view its responsibility to make these updates as seamless as possible and as quick as possible for the consumers, because in the end, it's whatever we're doing, it's related to someone who's using a vehicle, whether he owns it or just drives it or sits in it. It has to do with the consumer. So what's the perspective? And again, you can address it from a 5G standpoint, but just in general, how does the telecommunications industry look at this whole issue from the consumer side?
Yeah. First of all, it's like how you connect or how you download the software update. It shouldn't actually differ from a security perspective. If we go on 5G, 4G, or cable, we can protect it from where it's sent from. Until it's on the car, and with 5G systems we can do it, a bit faster than we did it in 4G and so on. But I think the biggest issue is anyway, like when we have got the software on the car protected and not interfere with, then it's up to, from the user perspective, to say, okay, should we do the update now or should we update later, as Matt discussed, and so on as well. We can get the software on the car and with integrity and authenticity in place, and that goes for any kind of connectivity, because there is secured functionality for all those different ones. And even though there is a bigger attack surface, of course, in a cellular and a mobile network, but we have the safeguards there to protect it.
Any other thoughts, Kai?
Yeah, maybe to come back to the time of the execution of the update, one requirement in Regulation 156 is that the vehicle user shall be informed about the expected time to complete the update. I think it's very important that the regulation ensures this. That means you know very well if there's an update, it will take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, whatever. So you can decide, will I update now or later? So I think that's very important that the user has a choice. But then if you compare different solutions, then it's up to the market to decide what is a good vehicle. And maybe in the past, it was mainly linked to the hardware, to the design, and maybe in the future, a good vehicle can be, it's more important to have a quick update capability. So I think that's then up to the end user to decide whether he prefers a vehicle which is maybe not so nice looking, but is very quick update, or a vehicle which is nice looking, but takes 2 hours to update. So this is really then up to the market to decide, and maybe customers will not buy any more vehicle, which is very nice, but which takes too long to be updated. It's like your computer. You have a computer and it's too slow. Then you will have to change it maybe after 5 years because it's really not working anymore with the environment. Maybe we come to this same with vehicles, that some vehicles, I would say they still stay compliant and safe, but they may be very slow with regard to updates in the future. And so maybe it is a reason to buy another vehicle, to buy a new architecture. But I think one important point here is we shall not compare a vehicle with a smartphone or with a personal computer, because I think the fundamental difference is if you buy a smartphone or a personal computer, you buy mainly the hardware and not the function. So you buy the hardware and then it's up to the customer to install software to decide what I install. So the customer can decide, will I install the antivirus or not? And will I install dangerous software? And if my PC crashes down because I installed unsafe software, I will not blame the manufacturer of the personal computer. That's a difference. However, if I buy a vehicle, I do not buy the hardware, I buy the function, and I buy a compliant, something which is safe. And in order to ensure safety, we need to keep the vehicle manufacturer in the loop for the safety of the vehicle. So it's not for the vehicle, there's always a link between the hardware and the software and the overall compliance. And no, today, I think maybe it will change in the future, but today, no owner of a vehicle will say, okay, once I have bought the vehicle, I take the full responsibility that any software update I do will stay safe. I cannot imagine this in the short term. So it will be not as a personal computer, it will be really the customer of the vehicle wants that the vehicle manufacturer stays responsible for the safety. But this means also that he cannot just make very dangerous things. So the vehicle manufacturer needs to have a certain control about the update to ensure the update is safe, secure, and the vehicle stays compliant. So it's slightly different, I think, between a vehicle and a smartphone or a personal computer, where today I think the customers, they accept that they are responsible to keep your computer safe and secure.
I think I'm going to come back to that issue of the similarities and differences between smartphones and cars. But I wanted to ask Svante to come in on this discussion. Yes.
Already coming in. I like discussions, so I'm lively in discussions. I have to apologize. Yeah, I think what we need to consider as well is what if the update itself is most important for the safety of the user. This has to be part of the communication with the user too. So from the user perspective, I mean, we always have to think of the most lazy user. I mean, I consider myself a lazy user when my mobile phone asks me, you want that update? And I think, oh, do I really need to do this now? Maybe later, now I need my phone, right? There we have the thing again. But with a car, if we ask the users, do you really want that update? That's probably not the safest way for them to drive their vehicle. So I think also the severity of the update or what it actually changes. I mean, it's in the regulation that has to be told, but it must be told in a way that every user understands. And that's going to be a tricky number for everyone, I think. User communication is not easy. And then you have you have to assume users who are not very much tech freaks, who are not very much into the whole cybersecurity part. So telling them your vehicle might not be secure anymore, and this can have effects on your safety, will be a tough nut to crack as well. And also then something which hasn't been said before, but where you might want to have a look at it, especially the car manufacturers, is the nosy users. So thinking about all the users who think, oh no, now I have a nice new little toy to play with, and I can program my own stuff in. And this is going to be, I mean, the hacker kitties are out there already, and not even hacker kitties, but everyone really who is into that technology and buys a car like that will be probably on the first row when it comes to high tech. So you have to account for changes made by the users as well. And this is probably going to be quite tricky as well.
Any other thoughts?
Just about this, as you brought up there, like the ones trying to access and interfere with the systems, and it goes for any interface. I'm coming from a telco perspective. Of course, we need to secure the interface, have it fully authenticated when we're always trying to do things. Is it a software update, or if it's something else trying to manage a vehicle? Same must go for any interface, if they're local interfaces or other interfaces. I have in our team people working with this penetration testing, vulnerability testing, and of course they're trying everything. Some of those guys, as you say, but we need to have all this security functionality in place, so all the interfaces are authenticated and authorized before you actually can start interfere or actually do anything with the system on board.
I guess one question that has continuously popped up in my mind is why are we asking the car industry to do something that we don't ask other industries? And this gets to the point that Kai made. Well, smartphones are different. PCs are different. Yeah, they are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if I can't get into my bank account in order to pay my bills, I'm any less disadvantaged than if I can't get in my car and drive it. But we do ask the automobile industry to do things in a lot of ways. The insurance industry says, you have to have insurance in order to do this. Is it really fair that the car industry has to comply with this kind of regulation now that's been made into a law in Europe and Japan, in order to get a car on the road, without turning to the other industries and saying you should do this as well. You need to have a software management update system. You need to control this. You have to comply with these regulations. How do we feel about this? Are we singling out the automobile industry to do something that it should be doing that's really good? And maybe we should be applying this to iPhones and or smartphones and to cars.
So from my perspective, it's the safety angle.
Yeah.
So to cause injury to yourself or somebody else with a smartphone is actually quite difficult. You can, but you need quite a bit of brute force behind whatever you're hitting somebody with.
Mm-hmm.
With a computer, it's pretty much the same. But if you look at comparable transport industry, so aviation, software updates for aircraft are even heavier. The regulation is much heavier for that, in terms of actually the safety approvals need to be redone mostly after each software update on an aircraft. So for comparable industries, it's actually not dissimilar in terms of guaranteeing the safety and security of the item.
Okay, so my follow-up question on this then, this was a lead-in. If this is so important, how can it be that there are suppliers working within the automobile industry that are saying we weren't even aware of this? Which then gets to the next question: what are we doing in these countries where this is going to be adopted, within the EU, for example, or within Japan? What are we doing to ensure that the eventual consumers are aware that this is happening, are prepared for this, are educated in this? How is this being made, or should it be made? Put it another way, should this be made part of a regulation? The UN says this.
Should what be made part of regulation, Michael?
Say that?
Should what be made part of a regulation?
So you're saying it will be made. It will be made part.
I was trying to clarify your question.
Yeah. Should this be made part of the regulation? We're making a regulation that has to be adopted by the automobile industry and its suppliers. And this has to do with cybersecurity and software updating. But the effect of this isn't on the car industry. It is if something bad happens and they have to pay lots of money. But the effect is on the users of these systems, the systems being the cars and the vehicles.
So it's not new. This isn't new. If you look at recall, for safety recalls, that is on the user. They are expected to bring their vehicle back in to have work done on it so that it's safe and compliant. So it's not actually a new concept. It's just done differently.
Yeah,
slightly
and
more
also
eloquently.
I think it's growing, right? I mean, the awareness, especially now during COVID times, the awareness that there are cyber threats out there is being raised quite dramatically. Unfortunately, one has to say, but I mean, it's kind of marketing on its own, unfortunately. But I think the awareness that there are cybersecurity issues in everything we do, whether it is using our mobile phones or our personal computers or working from home, whether it is the devices which are connected to the internet, IoT devices, as a main discussion at the moment, whether they're cyber secure or not. And manufacturers themselves can probably win plus points if they do some advertisement and marketing about, yeah, we are cyber secure. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe it needs a little marketing, but generally I think there is an awareness in the users for cybersecurity, and it's growing day by day.
But you did say that I think all of us hesitate about updating our software. I just updated my iPhone, 3 generations of updates, and the phone, of course, it doesn't do what it did before. And there are things that are doing strange. It suddenly turns itself off. Things that didn't happen before because I've done this update. Do we need to have more of a conscious implementation of this that includes the customers being made aware of what the implications are and how they should react to it? I've read the regulations, front to back, both of them, and they're terrific. They're absolutely the exact kind of regulations. They're the best regulations that I've ever seen. I mean, if I had to implement something, I would want this kind of regulation because it does a great job. And 157 is right in line with that. Absolutely fantastic. But what I don't see is the implications of this on the customer, on the people who have to actually use this. Should there be something else? Should there be something that, whether the UN does it or not, should there be something else that we're doing to bring the customers into this, to make sure that all of these great regulations that the car companies are going to implement are actually appreciated and used by the consumers? That's my question.
Maybe, yeah, okay, I try to comment. So I think from the customer point of view, the customer there are very different kind customers. Huh? There is the minimum customer who's, I don't want to care about software, about updates. I want to drive a car which is safe.
Yes.
Okay. And for this customer, of course, it's not necessary to make any update any week, or he can, if there's really a safety update of the cybersecurity, it's like Darren said, it could be a recall today, also for hardware. If we say that we discovered 1 year after vehicle production, there may be a safety risk, we may need to recall a vehicle to replace something. And for the software update, if it's over the year, it's even easier. We can say, okay, 1 year after production of the vehicle, we consider there may be a safety risk, so we do a software update to keep the vehicle safe. But of course, it is not necessary very often, but it may happen. So it will be easier than today because it's over the air. It's not a hardware part you need to replace. You can update the software, and the customer, I think he will understand. I see no problem. He will, when he gets information, we need to update your vehicle to make it even safer. I think the customer will understand. This is one extreme customer. The other customer, he wants to have new features, to have new applications on the cars, new other systems, new infotainment systems. And this is great that he can now also, if he wants, update the vehicle during the vehicle life. So if he bought the vehicles 3 years ago and now there are new software updates available, he can choose to buy them or to take them and to install them on the vehicle, and the vehicle is still compliant. And so I think the regulation covers both cases. The customer which just want to have the minimum to have a safe and compliant car, and also the other customer who likes to add new features. And there's of course a business case, because you could even design new features to vehicles which are already sold and improve functions of the vehicle, improve others' functions, or why not emissions? Why not saying we have a better calibration of the engine so we can reduce your CO2 emissions and you will have a cleaner car? This is possible in the future. So I think it's very flexible, and normally different kind of customers should find their solution. And another aspect we discussed also about the suppliers. I think somebody said, well, the suppliers are not aware of this regulation. This is as any regulation. If I am a supplier of a safety belt and the crash test regulation changes, I should know it. And if I was not aware, then maybe I have some problems. And it's the same if I'm a supplier for software. I've never heard about the cybersecurity regulation, then there are maybe some problems. It's like the safety belt supplier which have never heard about crash test regulations and say, oh, I didn't know there's a crash test and my safety belt was not designed for. So we have created the UN task force in 2016, so 5 years ago. And I think any supplier who is interested in software and develop software had a good opportunity to participate. There was CLEPA, the supplier organization, was part of the UN task force. So I think this engineer who was interested had 5 years to participate. And I hope that if there are suppliers who work really in software development, they know the regulation. So this is as any regulation. If I work, I don't know, for lighting, I make vehicle lights, I should know lighting regulations. And if I don't follow them, there's a high risk that I cannot sell them anymore in some markets. But I think this is true already for the other components, and for software, this is new. This is maybe the problem. That's the first time we introduce a regulation on cybersecurity and software update, and the people are not used to it. And once now we have done this first step, I think the people know there is something, there's a regulation, I have to comply. And I think for the future evolutions of the regulation, the people will be better prepared, because they know this is a regulation I have to respect, and maybe there are even updates of the regulation. There will be new requirements which may come in the next years. So I know I have to follow it. I cannot wait until the entry into force, 2024. I have to follow it from the very beginning. And I think those suppliers who are interested, they are with us, and they participated in the drafting of the regulation.
Okay. Any further thoughts on this? I can tell you this is going to be a subject of one of my newsletters. So because I'm not going to let this issue go. Do you think that, is there anyone here?
It's probably also worth just mentioning that in the task force we did discuss the option of forcing software updates.
Yeah, that was my question. Yeah, go ahead.
And as you see, it didn't make it into the final cut because different jurisdictions would take different approaches. So it's still possible that within a jurisdiction that there may be a requirement, but within the R156, it's a very, very tricky topic once you get into the weeds of how you would do it, how you require it, and what categories would fit within it.
Yeah. So what you're saying then is if Japan or let's say South Korea decides to put this into their type approval, they could in fact on their own decide to make it obligatory, not, you can decide yourself if you want it or not.
They're free to gold plate and add probably, but within the UN for the global harmonization, this is something we didn't put into the final regulation. We discussed it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's not a simple topic as it appears at first glance.
Sure, it's a very difficult one. I'm looking at a question right here in the Q&A. There may still exist users who decide not to update and keep postponing the updates. We discussed that. What kind of issues will this scenario create?
This is also, so you do have periodic technical inspection, and it's possible that at that the vehicle may if it hasn't got the latest safety critical update that must be put on to maintain type approval, and it doesn't have it at periodic technical inspection, then it may fail. And it's possible that the software on the vehicle is known, which would enable that to happen. It's a possibility.
Okay. All right. Before I move on to another bigger question, there's a question that came in here specifically to Matt, and I'm not 100% sure of the question itself, but I'm going to ask you this question, Matt, and you can respond. Will GM support NHTSA's effort to make GTRs for Reg 155 and 156? Can you explain that question?
Yes, I think so. NHTSA is working on the harmonization. This is for non-member, non-participatory members. I'm not the guy that knows all the nuances, but we didn't sign the, Darren can help me out, the 1958 or whatever it is. I apologize, I don't know it exactly. and then I'll get to the. Go ahead, Darren.
No, I just saying, yeah, spot on.
Okay.
So we are currently working on technical requirements within the task force that could be used by countries that are signatory to the 1998 agreement, such as the United States. But it's not a GTR.
Yep.
And obviously GM are an important part of the task force.
All right. So the answer to the question is GM will support NIST's effort to make GTRs for Reg 155 and 156. And for all of people who are listening in, GTR is?
Global Technical Regulation.
Okay. What other countries besides the United States and Canada are not signatories to the convention, 1958 convention? I think it's the Vienna Convention.
No. I think the 1958 agreement is an agreement which is signed by, I think, 54 countries worldwide, around 54 countries. And all the countries, they have a type approval regime. That means, what does it mean? It means if you want to sell a vehicle or you want to register a new vehicle, then you have to have a type approval. What is then required, it depends on each country, but you need to type approve it. On the other hand, there are some countries, as for instance, USA and Canada, which have a self-certification regime for safety. And in this case, you don't have a type approval. You don't need to go to authority to test the vehicle. You just declare, I'm compliant with all regulations, and with this, you can sell the vehicle. So it's a completely different approach. And the regulations 155 and 156, they are written in a way that you have a type approval, so it fits for all the countries of the 1958 agreement, and also for other countries which have a type approval regime, even if they're not signatory to 58 agreement. But for countries with a self-certification regime, it does not work. And for this reason, as Darren said, we have in the UN task force currently a work ongoing with all countries worldwide, of course, in order to define a simple set of requirements which say these are technical requirements, and those technical requirements, they can be used then in countries which have a self-certification regime, for instance, to say these are technical requirements. We do not speak about type approval, but those requirements should be respected in our country to improve cybersecurity or to make software updates compliant. So it's a kind of light version of the regulation, which takes some requirements which are applicable even in countries like United States and Canada, which have a self-certification regime.
And what are some of the other countries, for example?
For example, in the Latin Americas and Southeast Asia, there are quite a lot, and in Africa, there are quite a lot of countries.
How about China? How about China? Yeah.
China has a type approval regime. So they are not member of the 58 agreement, but they have type approval. That means you need to have a type approval before you can register a vehicle in China.
South Korea has type approval. Japan has type approval. Australia?
Australia is part of the agreement. They're within the agreement.
Okay.
I think maybe one last point for the vehicle industry and also for the customer. Then it's important not to have 100,000 different requirements. So I think we have an interest to have as much as possible harmonized requirements, because it's not realistic to design for each country a specific vehicle architecture which is different. This is not realistic, and it's not, I think, in the sense of the customer, because it will make the vehicle much more expensive. So that's a real interest, I think, for the final consumer to have not so much different requirements, but to have UN requirements which are harmonized, so that then we can have the same vehicle design, the same vehicle architecture, which goes in different countries. And for this reason, I think once we have a kind of majority of countries, and the 54 countries of 1958 agreement are a lot of countries. So I think when you can design a vehicle which is compliant to this, it should be easy to have it also compliant for the other countries. If not, there's a problem. for the customer.
Yeah, and I think the other way around is also probably the European market is still quite interesting for any other car manufacturer. So if they want to get their cars on our roads, they have to comply. And this is why harmonization is very important for all of us, really, and why they're even if they are not part of the agreement, they might want to have a look at all those regulations and stick to it, because they have their own interest in selling our cars, in selling us cars to run on our streets.
Totally agree. So let's come back to the issue of risk. Where do you feel the greatest risk of malware introduction? Is it in the vehicle? Is it in the design of the Ethernet in the vehicle? Is it in the communications from the vehicle? Is it in the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? Where is the greatest risk that you see in the possible introduction of malware?
I'll jump in, Michael, on that one, and I'll start off by saying my answer is only will be caveated by topics that you mentioned. We call it sub-tier visibility, right? Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. We lose visibility much beyond tier 2, our chip providers. So for us, we've seen the supply chain attacks that Guido mentioned, SolarWinds and Hafnium. Attacks like that, where an attacker, a nation state attacker, can compromise part of the build chain. We see what the effects could be. So that's devastating to an OEM. I'm going to carve that aside for a sec, and then now focus on the connected vehicle ecosystem in general, a produced car. Where we see the most activity in general in the industry is on the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth. Those are the ones where skills transfer very well to hackers who traditionally focus on PCs, computers, and mobile devices. And they're very familiar with the protocols. And they're also very familiar in many cases with the vulnerabilities in some of the protocol implementation. So for us, because it's customer facing, it's a touch point that customers are familiar with, and it's an area where many hackers have known skills and they can apply them to an infotainment unit in a vehicle. That is one where lots of attention is placed.
Any other thoughts? Malware.
I mean, yeah,
introduction.
maybe it's also always, and then we're back to attack vectors. We have to think of who's going to be the one who wants to attack our cars and our fleet, and what's their possible way to make their way into our systems. So is it the script kiddies we have to be afraid of? Would that be the mobile devices connected to the telephone, or are those state actors who are trying to infiltrate and maybe even use it? I mean, and I really hope not this is going to be the case, but maybe for warfare reasons. If you think ahead 50 years or so, and we think that we have autonomous driving trucks driving our goods all through Europe, for example, we've seen what happened if the borders close for a few weeks now in COVID situations or with the Brexit or whatever. And we see those lines of trucks and goods not delivered, and vaccinations not reaching their destination, or insulin or whatever. So there's a massive threat on this, and these attackers would probably choose a different way in than some script kiddies who just want to fool around and see whether they can make the headlights of cars blink or something.
Michael, if I may follow up the comment. I think we've seen recently in the United States, and I suspect many in the audience are aware of it too, there was the recent case of social engineering introduction of malware attempted in the Gigafactory in Nevada with a Russian national. So these are the days of automotive OEMs being able to not focus on nation state motives. I'm not attributing any nation state motives to that particular example. I'm just reporting what was in. But those days, I can tell, I can share with the group in the Auto ISAC, there is a white hot focus on IT/OT, white hot. And there are new work groups being stood up with CISOs across all of the OEMs, Toyota, GM, Ford, Stellantis. This is a big deal. We don't have our heads in the sand. We recognize that we don't have the answers. We also recognize that we can't avoid this.
Patrick, I'll come back to the question again about what we can do or what can be done to reduce the risk through actions that the telecommunications can take. And that this is everywhere from what we put in the vehicle, the SIM chip in the vehicle or the integrated chip in the vehicle, all the way through the networks, is particularly related to the automotive industry.
Yeah, also as Brad brought up, Matt brought up before, this is an attack vector as well. And there is a big attack surface in the telco, and of course there are potential risks. The telco networks are used for so many other things than just connected cars as well. So of course there is different kinds of threats on the network depending on what the attacker wants to do. There we have a nation state as well, even for warfare into telco. So we have those threats as well. But coming back to the automotive and or other connected things, so what we can do and what we have done from telco side is we have to have the security in place, especially over the radio interface. The radio interface can be attacked. We have had vulnerabilities before. They have been fixed now in 5G. Maybe there are more coming up. You never know. But the big ones like fake base stations, IMSI catchers for following or tracking cars. And normal, like some hackers, just the activists for having fun, they would not attack the wireless interface from a telco, because you need specific equipment for that one. There you go, as Matt said, for the Bluetooth, for the Wi-Fi. But there is, of course, that attack surface. What we have done is we're securing the credentials to be able to authenticate, to set up the secure communication. And you have in the SIM, or also now with embedded SIMs, they are not very easy to get out those keys. Okay, in laboratory it has been done, but it's not very easy to get it out and then get secure. But of course, there could be also other ways to get in to the car via supply chain attacks as well, potential also in the Tetra networks, and have access into our networks and then has that as a YAMP host for getting further in. So the threats are there, but I think at least based on the threat we see today, I think we have taken most of the at least the technical aspects into place to mitigate. And there is always the other things with social engineering, people that can come in and change networks and configuration and all those parts. But the technical measures, we are also now working on the supply chain aspects as well, to getting that more into also in the telco equipment and protecting the supply chain and so on. But there is always the operational and the human possibility that can do any harm to the network and so on. And we see them as well in telco networks.
This may be a question to tax, not to tax your ingenuity, but to bring out any discussions that you may have had in all of the meetings that you've had and the considerations that you've made. Are there things that you feel the automobile industry could be doing differently to make both cybersecurity more secure and software updates faster, easier, less expensive, and also more secure? Is there something that the automobile industry should be doing differently from what it's been doing? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think, and this is something which was mentioned by Guido beforehand, is that we're now all at a point where the regulation is there, and the regulation is good, as it has been stated before. Has been stated, for example, in the regulation that you have to monitor everything which is on the street for cybersecurity breaches and everything. So what could be used more, but I'm aware that as well as suppliers as also OEMs are already making use of this measure, are digital twins, to see and to get a second environment where you can test things and see how, I mean, Patrick just said, it's a very, very complex system. Car is more than 150,000 million lines of code, more complex than any computer, really. In the future, and it's going to get more and more complex. So if you have that abstract idea of earlier on you pulled a screw somewhere and something else tweaked afterwards, that's probably something which you can't that easily see now anymore. You're running a software update, and it might affect completely different things than you actually tried to fix beforehand. So this is where digital twins can be a valuable source for running and testing this in a safe environment beforehand, and then afterwards only apply it when you know it only does what it's intended to do and does not do what it's not intended to do. Yes.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you're saying that we should have a virtual car that simulates a real car, and that we test everything in the virtual car, and then we implement this in the real car to make sure it's working properly.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Kai, do you have anything that Stellantis should be doing that it isn't doing now? You don't have to give away any secrets. No intellectual property will be passed here. But is there something the industry could be doing? Let me give you an example. I have said that the main reason that this little company that started back in California was able to get up to the sales that it's gotten up to is that it identified that one of the absolute requirements for over-the-air updates was having an electric car. Because if you try to update a car just when it's running, you run into all kinds of situations where it's only running for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and then turn it off, and then you got to start over again and all that stuff. So it says you've got an electric car, plug it in, leave it overnight, everything gets updated, and it's the end of the story, right? So their whole business case was based on having an electric car so they can do over-the-air updates. That's one way of looking at what Tesla did. Is there something else that the industry could be thinking about to make software updates and cybersecurity easier and better if they just did something?
May I again?
Yeah. Sure. Hop in.
It's very, very simple, but I think there's one thing called money, which is needed on all, because I've been talking to CISOs and everyone else, and what they've been telling me, yeah, we would like to implement all this. We would like to spend my workforce and doing task forces, but they don't have the funding for it.
Yep.
Because still on the management level, it's not seen as important as it is actually. And another reason for this is, especially for the suppliers, they come up to me and say, please give me something, not just this far away United Nations regulation, but something which is German law, which I can put on the table of my CEO, and where he says, right, so we're going to spend money on this.
Yep.
And I think this is something, especially because we're quite active in the education part. We're delivering trainings on all this. But education comes with money.
Yep.
And if they don't have a proper reason to put in front of their CEO, that's why it's not happening that fast as it could be happening.
Thoughts? I mean, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
Yep,
I'll jump in. Another thing that Guido mentioned. Guido he's like a long lost family member. He had it was like a tick list of all the things that keep me up at night. One of them also for the industry is how do you grow? What training resources, what curricula exist? Where on the upon graduation, you have an employee who's ready with knowledge of CAN, knowledge of the limitations of embedded microprocessors, real-time operating systems, virtualization. I don't think anybody has cracked the nut of global standards and a collective academic alignment to create that. There are pockets of universities, we have them, some in the United States that focus on that. Not trying to beat the Auto ISAC drum, there's an initiative in the Auto ISAC to create a theory to practice fundamentals kind of cybersecurity engineer course. But that is something that I think a lot of companies, especially a lot of suppliers that may not have the resources of a large OEM to bring in people and have the time to groom them, to give them access to bench tests, to vehicles, to penetration testing, to learn the theories and the fundamentals. So training is one. It's also an area at General Motors we brief to our board, to Mary Barra and the board, because it is such a consequential. It's a gap that we see, and we need to close that gap.
Well, there's at least one institute that's making an attempt to fill the gap, and it's represented here by Svantje. This is why I asked the question before. Are there any other institutes or educational organizations that are doing something similar? Because clearly ISS is doing this and is focusing. So maybe you can send over some folks to Germany.
I would welcome that.
Yeah, I'll be a quick aside. I won't give you the details, but is it OTH Regensburg? We have engaged. They have a vehicle cybersecurity pen testing academic discipline there. We have had awesome engagement with teams in Europe. So our hats are off.
Yeah.
Yes,
we've got one.
There are other research groups as well. There's the automotive security research group, which has been founded, I think, even by Bosch. So there are groups which are forming, and I think the relevance of cybersecurity education has grown quite a lot. Even in the OEWG last statements at the United Nations, it's in the report that cybersecurity capacity building is one of the major pillars for cybersecurity for all ICT around the world. So yeah, we've been focusing on this. And I think another little point I would like to add is, especially with regards to this regulation, we have two different types of cybersecurity which has to be taught or educated in. On the one hand, we have the management system and those people who are responsible for the management. And then we have all the technical security parts.
Yep.
And now these people need to talk to each other. And it may seem like normal to you, but it's not. Those people usually don't have to talk to each other. And it gets more and more complex. I have a linguistic background, so I know what communication does and what communication means. And communication between this very, very different types of people or ways of thinking. I think one of the groups is more engineering thinking, and the other one is management thinking. And now they have to get this all in one. So these are lessons to be learned as well from everyone, and I think it has to grow. It will grow over the time.
Well, amazingly, we are almost at the end of our time. I think there are lots of questions that came in. I've tried to incorporate many of those questions into the questions that we've been discussing. Some of them have been left unanswered. One of the last questions is, are we going to be able to see this? And I think we answered that in the beginning. But of the 123 who are now left, the answer is yes. All this will be available. And I'm certainly going to go back because there are things that I missed in everything that you said, including this discussion. I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to be part of this discussion with you. I've learned a tremendous amount in these last 90 minutes, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the work that's going to be done in the next year. Hopefully, we'll all be back in Geneva at the Motor Show next year to discuss this again. I'm going to turn the screen back and the audio back to Stefano for closing remarks. And thank you, all of you, for your engagement and your discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the panelists. Yes, thanks to Guido, was our keynote, Swanti, Darren, Matthew, Patrick, and Kai. Thank you all. It was really an interesting session today. My take today is that the cybersecurity framework is ready, but it's also new, so it might require a review as we learn more about it. Ladies and gentlemen, the second day of the symposium has successfully concluded. I'm reminding you all that the symposium continues tomorrow, 24 March, from 13 to 16 CET as of today. Another very interesting session will focus on the path forward to achieve highly automated driving. It will be moderated by Mr. Roger Langton, Director of Automotive, Connected Mobility and Strategy Analytics. As always, please remember to register for tomorrow's session. This is Stefano Polidori from the ITU. Thank you all for joining today, and see you again tomorrow. Thank you.